Part 1. The reading of the will. For 15 years, my world was measured in thousandths of an inch. If you step into Vance Precision Works on a quiet Tuesday morning, the first thing you'll smell is warm cutting fluid, atomized hydraulic oil, and the faint, sweet scent of ground high-carbon steel. The second thing you'll notice is the silence. A true precision shop doesn't clatter or bang. When a 5-axis CNC mill or a 1950s Monarch lathe is set up properly by someone who knows what they're doing, it sounds like a heavy silk sheet being torn in half, a steady, unbroken hum. My uncle Silas taught me that sound when I was 19 years old. While other kids my age were leaving our Rust Belt town for college or chasing fast money in sales, I stayed in the shop. Silas took me in after our parents passed away, and under his patient, grease-stained hands, I learned the craft. I learned how to hand-scrape cast-iron lathe beds flat to within 3 microns. I learned how to program complex toolpaths for aerospace turbine components. By 30, I wasn't just running the shop, I was the shop. Silas and I had a simple, unwritten rule. The metal never lies. You can talk a great game, you can wear a $3,000 suit, but if your tolerances are off by 2/10,000ths, the shaft will seize, the bearing will shatter, and the machine will stop. Uncle Silas passed away on a rainy Thursday in late October, after a brutal 6-month battle with pancreatic cancer. I spent those 6 months sleeping on a cot in his hospice room at night and running 12-hour shifts at the shop during the day to keep our municipal and defense contracts afloat. 3 days after the funeral, I sat in the oak-paneled office of Silas's longtime estate attorney, Arthur Pendleton. Sitting across from me, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and gold cufflinks, was my younger brother, Julian. Julian hadn't been seen in town for nearly 6 years. He had left for Miami at 22, running through 3 different investment startups, leaving a trail of unpaid debts, broke business partners, and unpaid taxes in his wake. He hadn't called Silas once during his illness. He hadn't sent flowers. He hadn't even come to the hospital. But he showed up at the memorial service in a rented sports car, wearing a solemn expression that looked like it had been rehearsed in a hotel mirror. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses as he opened a thick manila file. "Caleb Julian," Pendleton began, his voice heavy. "Silas's original estate plan, drafted 7 years ago, was simple. The residential property and personal accounts were to be split equally between the two of you. The business, Vance Precision Works, including the 12,000 square foot facility, all machinery, tooling, and land, was designated entirely to Caleb, subject to a lifetime operational trust." I nodded slowly. That was the plan, Silas, and I had discussed 100 times over Sunday dinners in the shop break room. "However," Pendleton continued, his brow furrowing as he pulled out a stapled, blue-backed document, 4 days before Silas entered end-of-life hospice care in September, a revised codicil and power of attorney amendment were filed with the Allegheny County Registrar. I froze. A codicil? Silas was on high-dose morphine in September. He barely knew what day it was. Julian sat up straight, crossing his legs casually. "People change their minds when they face the end, Caleb. Silas realized family comes first, all family, not just the one who stayed behind to play with drill presses." Pendleton looked deeply uncomfortable. "Under the terms of this amended codicil, full administrative power of attorney over the real estate and corporate assets was transferred to Julian. Furthermore, the land and building at 400 Industrial Parkway have been designated as a liquidatable asset, to be managed solely at Julian's discretion." "That's impossible," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Silas wouldn't sell this land if his life depended on it. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek silver fountain pen, tapping it against his knee. "It's already done, brother." "What do you mean, already done?" Julian leaned forward, his polished smile vanishing, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a lone shark. 3 days ago, as sole executor under the amended power of attorney, I executed a binding purchase and sale agreement with Vanguard Industrial Acquisitions. The entire parcel, the shop, the yard, the equipment, has been sold for $4.2 million. Closing is in 30 days. You have 4 weeks to clear out your personal hand tools and hand over the keys. The air left the room like a pressurized hydraulic line, snapping in half. "You sold Uncle Silas's shop behind my back," I whispered, "to a commercial demolition firm." "I sold a decaying piece of Rust Belt real estate to a group that's redeveloping the entire waterfront into luxury distribution hubs," Julian corrected smoothly. "You spent 15 years breaking your back for 50 grand a year, Caleb. I just turned our uncle's dirt into millions. Half the cash goes into an escrow account for you after closing. You should be thanking me. You can finally buy a nice house and retire from getting grease under your fingernails." He stood up, buttoning his jacket, and looked down at me with genuine condescension. "Don't make this difficult, Caleb," Julian said quietly. "The contract is signed. Vanguard's earnest deposit is already cleared. If you try to occupy the building after the closing date, the county sheriff will remove you. Take your toolboxes and move on." Part 2. The Audit of the Theft. I didn't scream. I didn't reach across the mahogany desk and grab Julian by his tailored lapels. When you spend your life machining hardened steel to microscopic tolerances, you learn that anger is just wasted friction. Friction creates heat, heat creates thermal expansion, and thermal expansion ruins the part. Instead, I went back to the shop. It was 6:00 p.m. The shop floor was dark, illuminated only by the amber emergency exit lights and the soft green standby glow of the Haas VF4 vertical machining center near the bay doors. I walked down the center aisle, my boots echoing off the sealed concrete floor that Silas and I had poured ourselves 10 years ago. I ran my hand along the heavy cast iron bed of our flagship 1968 Cincinnati milling machine. Silas had rebuilt the spindle with his own hands. This place wasn't just a building. It held the physical sweat, history, and mechanical soul of 3 generations of master fabricators. And my brother had sold it like cheap scrap iron to line his pockets. I walked up the iron stairs to Silas's second-floor office overlooking the shop floor. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, pulled out a flashlight from my belt, and got to work. Julian was slick, but he was lazy. He operated on charm, intimidation, and the assumption that quiet, working-class men would simply bow their heads when handed a legal document. He didn't understand how a fabricator thinks. When a system fails, an engineer doesn't cry. He performs a root cause failure analysis. I opened Silas's heavy filing cabinet behind the desk. For the next 8 hours, while the city slept, I dismantled Julian's paperwork brick by brick. By 2:00 a.m., the paper trail revealed the full depth of my brother's sociopathy. Julian hadn't just appeared out of nowhere 3 days after Silas died. He had been lurking in the shadows for 6 months. When Silas was first diagnosed, Julian was drowning in $800,000 of failed real estate debt in Florida. He found a corrupt, strip mall notary public 3 towns over, a man who owed Julian money from a past venture. Together, they had brought a stack of pre-drafted legal documents to Silas's hospice bed, while Silas was heavily medicated on high-dose pain management. They had taken my uncle's frail, shaking hand and guided his pen across the signature lines. It was a total forgery of intent, aggravated elder abuse, financial fraud, and probate theft rolled into one. I pulled out my phone and called a man named Gideon Cross. Gideon wasn't a corporate estate lawyer like Arthur Pendleton. Gideon was a retired state prosecutor who now specialized in industrial land rights and high-stakes fraud litigation. He was also a former customer, I had custom-machined replacement stainless steel hardware for his historic sailboat 4 years ago. "Caleb," Gideon's gravelly voice answered on the third ring. "It's past 2 in the morning. Is everything all right?" "Gideon," I said, looking out the window at the quiet machinery below. "My brother just sold my uncle's shop out from under me using a forged hospice codicil. He signed a P&S agreement with Vanguard Industrial Acquisitions." There was a long pause on the line. Vanguard? The group owned by the Sterling Development Conglomerate. The same ones. "Caleb, those guys are corporate sharks," Gideon warned sharply. "They buy up old industrial waterfronts, bulldoze them, and flip the land to logistics giants. If the closing is 30 days out, contesting a forged codicil in probate court will take 6 to 12 months. By the time a judge sits down to look at the signature, Vanguard will have already brought in the wrecking balls and flattened the building." "I know," I said, staring at the blueprints of the property laid out on Silas's desk. "That's why I don't want to fight this in probate court." "Then how do you want to fight it?" "I don't want to block the sale, Gideon," I said softly. "I want to let Julian push the deal all the way to the closing table. I want him to commit so deeply to Vanguard that he can't back out, and then I'm going to use the land itself to destroy him." Gideon let out a slow breath. "What are you talking about?" "Silas built this shop in 1974, I said. "Before it was a machine shop. Do you know what was standing on this 4-acre plot in the 1920s? A rail yard. A commercial heavy chemical plating and locomotive maintenance facility," I replied, a cold smile spreading across my face. "And Julian just signed a standard corporate purchase agreement that guarantees clean title and environmental indemnity to the buyer." Part 3. The Trap in the Bedrock. In high-stakes commercial real estate deals, there is a clause buried on page 42 of every standard industrial contract. Phase II, environmental liability and indemnification. When a developer like Vanguard buys an old factory, they usually pay for a basic Phase I survey, a quick walkthrough where an inspector checks for visible oil leaks, asbestos pipe wrapping, or leaky drums. If Phase I comes back clean, the deal moves forward to closing. Julian, in his desperate rush to secure the $4.2 million payout and satisfy his Florida creditors, had done something incomprehensibly stupid. To speed up the 30-day closing window, he had signed an exempt seller's warrant clause. He personally guaranteed Vanguard that the land was free of industrial contamination, agreeing that if any unrecorded toxic liabilities were found, the seller, Julian himself, would be personally liable for 100% of the environmental remediation costs. He thought he was just signing boilerplate paperwork to get his check faster. He didn't know the history of the earth beneath his feet. The next morning, I met Gideon Cross at a diner 3 blocks from the county courthouse. I brought a weathered leather-bound ledger from 1952 that I had pulled from Silas's hidden floor safe behind the shop lathe. "Look at this," I said, sliding the ledger across the table to Gideon. Gideon opened the yellowed pages. "What am I looking at?" "In 1958, my grandfather bought this parcel from the Allegheny Rail Authority," I explained. "Before he bought it, the site was used as an unlined dip tank station for chromium plating and locomotive boiler acid washing. My grandfather sealed the entire central yard under 4 feet of compacted clay and 8 inches of reinforced concrete in 1965 to build the current shop floor." Gideon's eyes widened as he read the historic site maps. "Is it recorded on the county environmental register?" "No," I said. "It was 1965. Nobody recorded anything with the state back then. The county environmental board has no idea what's sitting 20 feet below our concrete slab. As long as the concrete isn't broken, the soil is stable and completely safe. But if a developer tries to bulldoze the building, dig up the foundation, and sink steel pilings for a logistics warehouse, They'll hit the historical acid vaults. Gideon finished the sentence, a look of profound realization crossing his face. The moment they breach that clay cap, the EPA and the Department of Environmental Protection will shut down the entire waterfront. The site will become a Tier 1 Superfund hazard. And under page 42 of Julian's contract, I added smoothly, who is legally obligated to pay for the toxic soil excavation and chemical disposal? The seller, Gideon whispered. Julian personally. How much would a Tier 1 Superfund cleanup on a 4-acre waterfront parcel cost? I asked. Gideon calculated mentally, his face turning pale. Site containment, soil incineration, water table filtration, EPA oversight fines. Anywhere between $5 to $8 million. It would exceed the entire purchase price of the property. Exactly, I said. Julian thinks he's walking away with a $2.1 million profit after liquidating my life's work. But he's actually stepping directly onto a financial landmine that will wipe out every dollar he has ever stolen, bankrupt his shell companies, and leave him facing federal environmental fraud charges. Gideon leaned back in his booth, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. Caleb, you're not just stopping the sale. You're setting a trap that will completely obliterate your brother. He didn't just try to sell a building, Gideon, I said, my voice dropping to a low, quiet edge. He stood in front of an attorney, mocked Uncle Silas's memory, and tried to throw me out on the street like trash. He wants to play corporate hardball. Let's play. What's your immediate move? Gideon asked. For the next 3 weeks, I play the defeated, broken brother, I said. I pack up my personal tools. I don't raise a voice. I let Julian feel like he's won. And on the morning of the final closing at Vanguard's corporate office, I drop the historical soil core analysis directly onto the buyer's desk. Part 4, the 30-day illusion. For 21 days, I played my role to perfection. I brought heavy wooden crates into the shop floor every afternoon. I rented a flatbed truck and slowly hauled my personal hand tools, my precision granite measuring tables, and my grandfather's antique tool chests out of the building, storing them safely in a rented climate-controlled warehouse across the river. Julian stopped by the shop twice a week, wearing sunglasses and expensive leather jackets, snapping photos of the empty spaces on his phone to send to Vanguard's project managers. See, Caleb, Julian boasted on day 18, leaning against the doorframe of the office while smoking a cigarette. It's not so bad. You look lighter already. You don't belong in a dirty shop like this anyway. Once the escrow clears, you can take your couple million and open up a little hobby garage in the countryside. I kept my head down, wiping oil off a micrometer with a shop rag. The closing is set for next Friday at 10:00 a.m. 10:00 a.m. sharp at Vanguard's high-rise headquarters downtown, Julian said proudly. The CEO of Vanguard, Marcus Vance, no relation, funny enough, is flying in personally to sign the transfer. $4.2 million wired directly into the estate account. The bank releases the funds by noon. Are you sure you checked all the indemnity clauses, Julian? I asked softly, not looking up from my work. Vanguard is a multi-billion-dollar firm. Their legal team doesn't lose money. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. I have a top-tier corporate lawyer handling the closing, Caleb. I don't need advice from a guy who spends his life turning hand cranks on a lathe. Just make sure the keys are on the desk by 9:00 a.m. Friday. The keys will be on the desk, I said quietly. What Julian didn't know was that, while I was packing my toolboxes, Gideon Cross and I were working with a certified, licensed environmental forensic engineering firm from Philadelphia. 3 nights prior, under the cover of dark, we had brought a silent, electric micro-drilling rig into the back alley of the workshop. We drilled a tiny 2-inch core sample through 20 feet of earth directly behind the old plating vault wall, pulled the soil core, sealed it in airtight glass cylinders, and patched the drill hole with quickset hydraulic cement before sunrise. The certified lab analysis came back 48 hours later. The results were catastrophic. Heavy hexavalent chromium concentrations, historical solvent sludge, and localized acid saturation locked deep beneath the clay cap. The soil was completely dormant and safe as long as the building stood untouched. But the moment a demolition crew brought in excavators to tear out the foundation, which Vanguard planned to do 48 hours after closing, it would trigger an instant, mandatory EPA shutdown. Along with the lab report, Gideon had compiled a 40-page historical site dossier, complete with 1958 property transfer deeds, original municipal chemical disposal permits, and a certified copy of page 42 of Julian's signed purchase agreement highlighting his personal environmental indemnity guarantee. Everything was bound in a clean, professional black leather portfolio. The trap was built. The tolerances were set to 0. All that was left was to let my brother step onto the scale. Part 5, the closing room. Friday morning arrived under a pale, overcast steel-gray sky. The headquarters of Vanguard Industrial Acquisitions occupied the top 2 floors of a 30-story glass tower in downtown Pittsburgh. Its lobby was a sterile expanse of white marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and silent, fast-moving elevators that felt like pneumatic pistons. At 9:45 a.m., I stepped out of the elevator on the 28th floor. I was wearing a simple, clean charcoal suit, not expensive, but tailored, neat, and pressed. Slung over my shoulder was a leather messenger bag carrying the black portfolio Gideon cross, and I had finalized 2 days ago. Gideon walked beside me, his long, weathered overcoat buttoned against the morning chill, his leather briefcase held firmly in his right hand. We walked through the glass double doors into Executive Conference Room A. The room was built to intimidate. A 20-foot polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, flanked by leather executive chairs. Through the wall of glass behind the table, the 3 rivers of Pittsburgh wound through the city like cold silver ribbons. Julian was already sitting near the middle of the table. He was wearing a fresh dark blue suit, his hair slicked back, a gold pen resting on top of a stack of legal documents. Next to him sat his closing attorney, a sleek, fast-talking young man named Bradley Shore, who was busy scrolling on his tablet. Sitting across from Julian were 3 representatives from Vanguard, 2 senior corporate attorneys in identical gray suits, and Marcus Vance, the regional vice president of acquisitions. Marcus was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with short gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and a posture that screamed total corporate efficiency. When Julian saw me walk in, his smile flickered with irritation before resolving into a patronizing smirk. "Caleb," Julian said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "I told you that you didn't need to come to the formal signing. I'm handling the estate transfer as executor. You could have just checked your bank account this afternoon." "I brought the keys," I said quietly, stepping up to the mahogany table. I reached into my pocket, pulled out 2 heavy brass keys attached to a steel ring, and set them down on the polished wood in front of Marcus Vance. Marcus looked up, offering a professional nod. "Mr. Vance, I'm Marcus Vance, no relation, as your brother reminded us earlier." He reached out and shook my hand firmly. "We appreciate your cooperation in vacating the property so efficiently. Our demolition subcontractors are scheduled to break ground on Monday morning to prepare the soil for our logistics terminal." "Demolition subcontractors," I repeated slowly. "Yes," Marcus said, pulling a heavy pen from his inside coat pocket. "We're scraping the entire 4-acre lot down to bare dirt, driving 60-foot steel support pilings into the bedrock, and pouring a uniform heavy-load concrete pad for 40 regional distribution bays. Julian chuckled, leaning over to whisper to his attorney, Bradley Shore. "See, Caleb, real progress, not just fixing rusty lathes." "Mr. Shore," Marcus said, turning to Julian's attorney. "All conditions precedent have been met. The title search came back clear of current municipal liens. We have the seller's signed environmental representation and warranty agreement on page 42, exempting Vanguard from pre-existing site remediation liabilities under your client's personal indemnity guarantee." Marcus opened the master acquisition contract to the signature page and slid it across the mahogany table toward Julian. "Mr. Julian Vance," Marcus said, handing him a high-end fountain pen. "Once you sign line A, my legal team will execute the $4.2 million wire transfer from our escrow bank directly to the estate account. You'll have cleared funds within 20 minutes. Julian took the pen, his hands visibly trembling with excitement. He looked at me for a split second, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. In his mind, he was seconds away from erasing his debts, securing millions of dollars, and proving that he was smarter, faster, and better than the brother who had stayed behind to work with his hands. He lowered the nib of the pen to the paper. "Before you sign that, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the air conditioning like a cold steel blade, "you might want to read page 42 again." Julian stopped, his pen hovering a millimeter above the signature line. He scowled at me. "Caleb, shut up. The deal is done. Stop embarrassing yourself." "Julian," Bradley Shore hissed under his breath, waving his hand dismissively at me. "Ignore him. Sign the document." Marcus Vance frowned, looking up from his stack of paperwork. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vance?" "There isn't a problem with the sale," I said, stepping up to the table and unzipping my leather messenger bag. "There's just a small matter of structural geometry." I pulled out the black leather binder and laid it flat in the center of the mahogany table, directly between Julian and Marcus Vance. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his sharp eyes narrowing. "That," I said, "is a certified historical land use dossier and forensic soil analysis for 400 Industrial Parkway, performed by Allegheny Geotech Services on Tuesday night." Part 6, The Anatomy of a Collapse. The room went completely silent. Julian's attorney, Bradley Shore, laughed nervously, reaching for the binder. "This is absurd. The title company performed a standard phase I environmental review 2 weeks ago. The site is clean." "A phase I review checks for visible surface spills and recent chemical storage," Gideon Cross spoke up, stepping forward and opening his briefcase. "A phase I review does not check for unlined 1920s heavy chemical locomotive dip tanks buried beneath 4 feet of compacted clay and 8 inches of reinforced concrete." Marcus Vance didn't touch the binder immediately. Instead, he looked from Gideon to me, his corporate instincts instantly razor-sharp. "Explain." I opened the binder to tab 1. "In 1958, my grandfather bought the property from the Allegheny Rail Authority," I said, pointing to a high-resolution scan of a yellowed 1958 property deed. "From 1922 to 1957, the central 2 acres of that parcel were operated as an unlined industrial electroplating and boiler acid washing facility." I flipped to tab 2. "This is the site map from 1952, I continued smoothly. "Beneath the current main shop floor sits an array of 3 heavy timber acid vaults, containing high concentrations of hexavalent chromium, lead, and trichloroethylene sludge. In 1965, my grandfather sealed those vaults beneath a clay cap and a continuous concrete slab to contain the soil." Julian's face had lost some of its color, but he forced a harsh laugh. "So what? It's been down there for 60 years. The building has been standing fine." "It has been standing fine because the concrete slab was never broken," I said, turning to look directly at my brother. The soil is sealed and dormant, but Mr. Marcus Vance just stated on the record that Vanguard's development plan involves bringing in heavy excavators, breaking the concrete pad, and driving 60-foot steel pilings directly into the bedrock on Monday morning. I flipped to tab 3, pushing the certified laboratory report directly in front of Marcus Vance. The moment your demolition crew breaks that concrete cap on Monday, I said, you will breach the historical acid vaults. Hexavalent chromium will leach directly into the surrounding water table and the adjacent river. Under Commonwealth environmental law, the site will instantly be designated a Tier 1 state Superfund emergency. Marcus Vance leaned forward, his face turning as hard as granite as he began reading the lab numbers, the chemical parts per million readouts, and the certified engineering stamps from Allegheny Geotech. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered under his breath. Now, I said softly, turning to page 42 of the master contract lying on the table. Let's talk about legal liability. Gideon Cross leaned over the table, tapping his finger on clause 18.4. Under the exempt seller's warranty clause that Mr. Julian Vance signed to expedite this 30-day closing, Gideon explained in a calm, lethal voice. The seller personally warrants that the property is free of undisclosed hazardous waste and agrees to fully indemnify, defend, and hold harmless Vanguard industrial acquisitions from any and all site remediation costs, EPA fines, and third-party environmental claims. Bradley Shore's tablet slipped out of his hand, clattering loudly against the mahogany table. His face turned completely white. Julian, Shore whispered, turning to my brother with wide, terrified eyes. Did you sign the personal indemnity waiver without an environmental holdback escrow? Julian looked between his lawyer, Marcus Vance, and me, his chest heaving as panic began to overtake him. I signed what you told me to sign. You said it was standard boilerplate. It is standard boilerplate, Marcus Vance said, his voice dropping an octave into a cold, terrifying tone of corporate fury. He looked up from the dossier, his eyes locking onto Julian like a predator. It's boilerplate designed to protect my company from buying a toxic waste dump from an idiot. Marcus closed the folder with a sharp snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mr. Shore, Marcus said, leaning across the table toward Julian's lawyer. What is the estimated cost of a Tier 1 Superfund soil excavation and hazardous waste transport for a 4-acre heavy industrial site? Shore couldn't speak. He just sat there trembling. I'll tell you what it costs, Marcus answered his own question. Our environmental legal team handles these in New Jersey all the time. Containment, soil incineration, water table filtration, state oversight fees, and municipal penalties. Minimum $6.5 million. Upwards of $9 million if the plume hits the river. Julian stood up so fast his leather chair slid back and slammed into the glass window behind him. No, this is a setup. Caleb made this up. He drilled holes in the floor to ruin my deal. The core samples were taken by a state-licensed forensic engineering firm and notarized by the Allegheny County Environmental Board yesterday afternoon. Julian, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The state already has a copy of this report. Marcus Vance turned his head slowly to look at Julian. The professional courtesy was gone. The corporate warmth was gone. Standing in front of Julian was the chief executive of a multi-billion-dollar firm who had just realized he had almost been dragged into a multi-million-dollar environmental disaster. Mr. Vance, Marcus said to Julian, his voice icy. You certified in writing 3 weeks ago that you had no knowledge of unrecorded historical industrial waste on the site. You signed an indemnity guarantee to induce my firm into wiring $4.2 million. I didn't know, Julian screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. I didn't know about the 1920s rail yard, Silas never told me. Ignorance is not a defense under a strict liability indemnity contract, Gideon Cross noted cleanly. Marcus Vance stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at his two corporate attorneys. Cancel the escrow wire, Marcus ordered flatly. Terminate the purchase and sale agreement immediately under Clause 22 for material misrepresentation and environmental failure. Wait, Julian pleaded, reaching out with shaking hands, dropping his gold fountain pen onto the carpet. Mr. Vance, please, we can renegotiate. We can lower the price. I'll take $2 million. I'll take $1 million. We wouldn't take this property if you gave it to us for free, Marcus said, looking at Julian with absolute disgust. And Mr. Vance, my legal team will be filing a formal claim against you personally by 3:00 p.m. today to recover our $150,000 in earnest deposit, legal fees, and survey expenditures. Marcus turned to his attorneys. Call the office, clear my afternoon. He turned back, looked at me, and offered a short, respectful nod. Good day, Mr. Caleb Vance. Thank you for saving my company $7 million. Marcus Vance and his legal team picked up their laptops, walked out of the conference room, and let the heavy glass doors swing shut behind them. Part 7, The Reckoning. The silence in the room was suffocating. Bradley Shore didn't say a word. He simply gathered his tablet, packed his leather briefcase without looking at Julian once, and walked out the side door, leaving his client standing alone in the center of the massive room. Julian stood there, staring at the empty mahogany table, his mouth open, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The $4.2 million buyout was gone. The escrow wire was dead. The deal was destroyed. And he was left holding $150,000 in immediate legal liabilities to Vanguard, $800,000 in defaulted Florida real estate debts, and a piece of contaminated industrial land that no commercial developer on earth would ever buy. Julian slowly turned his head to look at me. The smug, arrogant brother who had walked into the attorney's office 3 weeks ago with gold cufflinks and a tailored suit was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate liar who had finally run out of room to maneuver. You, Julian whispered, his hands trembling violently at his sides. You ruined it. You destroyed everything. I was going to be free, Caleb. I was going to pay off my debts. You were going to sell Uncle Silas's life's work to pay for your own failures, I said, stepping closer to him. You forged his signature on a hospice bed while he was dying. You thought because I work with grease and steel, I was too stupid to see what you were doing. I'm your brother, Julian yelled, tears of anger and panic springing to his eyes. We're family. Family doesn't steal from a dying man, I replied quietly. Family doesn't try to throw their brother out on the street. Gideon Cross stepped forward, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a blue-backed legal document stamped with the official seal of the Allegheny County Orphans Court. Julian Vance, Gideon said, his gravelly voice filling the room. While you were preparing for this closing, Caleb and I filed an emergency petition for probate fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery with the Orphans Court. Julian stared at the document as if it were a poisonous snake. What? We submitted the handwriting analysis of Silas's hospice codicil, along with a sworn affidavit from the hospice nursing staff confirming Silas was heavily medicated and incapable of executing legal instruments on the date of signing, Gideon explained cleanly. 2 hours ago, a probate judge issued an injunction. Gideon laid the court order on the mahogany table. The amended codicil giving you power of attorney has been voided for fraud, Gideon stated. The court has formally stripped you of your status as executor. Full administration of Silas's estate, including the shop, the property, and all personal assets, has been transferred solely to Caleb. Julian dropped to his knees in the middle of the room, grabbing his head in his hands, staring at the carpet. "I'm ruined," he sobbed, his voice muffled. "I have creditors in Miami who will take everything I own. I have no money, I have nothing." I looked down at my brother. For 15 years, I thought I envied him. I thought he had found an easier, brighter path in life, while I stayed behind in the noise and smoke of the machine shop. But standing over him now, I realized the truth. Julian had spent his entire life building on sand. He relied on shortcuts, lies, charm, and theft, constantly running ahead of the collapse he created behind him. But when you run out of land, the wall you built comes falling down on your own head. "You have 30 days to pay Vanguard their $150,000 legal settlement, Julian," I said softly, looking down at him. "If you ever step foot on the shop property again, the county sheriff will arrest you for criminal trespass." I picked up my leather messenger bag, turned my back on my brother, and walked out of the conference room with Gideon Cross. Part 8, Solid Bedrock. By mid-spring, the quiet returned to the waterfront. The legal storm had fully cleared. The probate court officially validated Uncle Silas's original will, establishing Vance Precision Works as a perpetual operational trust under my sole ownership. Julian's collapse was swift and absolute. Unable to pay his Florida creditors or Vanguard's legal settlement, his shell companies collapsed into involuntary bankruptcy. To avoid criminal prosecution for probate forgery and financial elder abuse, he signed an absolute, permanent waiver relinquishing any remaining claims to Silas's estate, packed his bags, and fled back to Florida to face his civil judgment creditors. He was gone from our lives, swept away like metal shavings under a shop broom. On a warm, sunny Saturday afternoon in May, the shop was alive with sound. The 5-axis CNC mill was humming its steady, tearing silk song in the corner, cutting a high-precision titanium component for a regional aerospace contract. The heavy bay doors were wide open, letting the fresh river breeze and warm spring sunlight sweep across the sealed concrete floor. Standing near the main workbench were 2 young men, 18-year-old apprentices from the local technical high school that Uncle Silas and I had supported for years. They were wearing safety glasses, learning how to hand-scrape a cast-iron lathe bed flat to within 3 microns, just like Silas had taught me 20 years ago. I stood on the second-floor office balcony, holding a cup of hot black coffee, watching them work. Gideon Cross walked up the iron stairs, carrying a rolled-up set of structural engineering blueprints. "Caleb," Gideon said, setting the blueprints down on the desk. "The municipal permits for the new shop expansion just cleared the city council. We're breaking ground on the new east wing next month." "Did the environmental board approve the containment cap?" I asked, taking a sip of coffee. "Fully approved," Gideon smiled. "Because you're not demolishing the building or digging up the acid vaults, the state certified our cap and seal engineering plan. They called it a textbook example of sustainable industrial land preservation." I looked out the window at the river, sparkling in the afternoon light. The shop floor beneath my feet was solid. The steel beams above my head were hand-riveted and true. The tools in my cabinets were clean, organized, and ready for work. There were no forged documents in my desk. There were no fake brothers lurking in the hallway. There were no quick money schemes or toxic liabilities waiting to explode beneath the floor. I walked down the iron stairs, pulled a pair of safety glasses from my pocket, and walked over to the 2 apprentices at the bench. "Caleb," one of the kids asked, looking up from his scrap block with a micrometer in his hand, "how do we know if this surface is truly flat?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out Silas's old steel precision straightedge, and laid it gently across the ground iron. "You check the light beneath the edge," I said, my voice calm and steady. "If no light gets through, the tolerance is 0. The metal never lies." I looked around the workshop, at the machines, the history, and the future being built with honest hands on solid bedrock. The old structure had survived the storm. Now, it was time to build something that would last forever.